Have you ever realized that most of the things that exhaust you are not because they're too big, but because you react too quickly, overinterpret, and place your attention in the wrong places? There are arguments you don't need to win, yet you still get pulled into them. There are misunderstandings not worth correcting, yet you still try to explain them. There are small things that you should pass by, yet they occupy your mind for hours, even days. And the strange part is, you think you're controlling your situation, but in reality, it's controlling you.
From Carl Jung's perspective, people do not lose their power when they fail, but when they unconsciously react to everything that touches them. It is not the world that throws you off balance. It is your way of responding to it that becomes the cause. In this video, we will go through 7 profound psychological laws, not to help you control others, but to help you regain control of yourself. These are not surface-level techniques, but a shift in the way you exist, not reacting, not explaining, and knowing how to ignore what is unworthy. Because when you stop being triggered by the world, you do not just become calmer, you become unmanipulable. And that is the rarest form of psychological power that very few people ever reach. Law 1. Psychological distance. Not reacting is the first form of power. There are very small moments in life, yet they determine your entire direction. A sentence someone says, a suggestive glance, a fleeting cold attitude, and almost instantly a reaction rises within you. You feel the need to respond, to explain, to prove, or at least to do something to rebalance the emotion that has just been triggered. Most people believe that is themselves, but according to Carl Jung, that is simply the unconscious at work. You are not truly choosing the reaction is happening through you. This is where power begins, but also where most people lose it. When you react immediately, you are handing over control of your inner state to the external world. Someone else's words can determine your emotions. A small situation can pull you out of balance. And worse, you begin to act from a triggered state, saying things you do not truly want to say, doing things you did not consciously choose. You think you are responding, but in reality, you are being led. But if, in that very moment you do not react, everything changes. Not because you suppress yourself, not because you pretend to be calm, but because you create a small pause. A distance between what just happened and how you interpret it. In that distance, something rare appears, awareness. And it is there that you begin to become the one who chooses, instead of the one who is carried away. Carl Jung once wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." What triggers you the most is often not the external problem, but the parts within you that have not yet been outgrown. You cannot solve them by reacting better. You can only transcend them by no longer being triggered at all.
I once knew the story of a man working in a high-pressure environment. Every time his superior criticized him, even slightly, he immediately became defensive, explaining, arguing, sometimes even turning harsh. After each time, he felt regret, but when the situation repeated, the reaction still happened almost automatically, until one day, instead of reacting, he remained silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he realized the emotion within him was rising too fast to be trusted. He let that moment pass without adding any words. And for the first time, he noticed something strange. Not reacting did not make him weaker. It made him steadier. From then on, he began observing himself more and gradually situations that once made him lose control no longer had the same power.
That is the strength of psychological distance. It does not change the world, but it changes the way you exist in it. Imagine your mind as a lake. When strong winds come, words, behaviors, situations, the surface ripples immediately. If you react right away, you are acting while the water is disturbed and everything you see is distorted. But if you are patient enough to do nothing for a few seconds, the surface begins to settle. And only then can you see clearly what is actually happening. Most people live their entire lives without ever experiencing this distance. They believe emotions are truth, their reactions are necessary, that if they do not do something immediately, they will lose. But the truth is the opposite. The one who controls their reaction is the one who cannot be controlled. No one can trigger them unless they allow it. At first, this will not be easy. You will still feel the urge to say something, to do something. But every time you choose not to react, you are rewriting a small part of your internal system. And over time, the things that once shook you will gradually lose their power. You do not need to win every situation. You only need to not be pulled into them. Because in the end, power does not lie in how strongly you react, but in how firmly you can remain yourself when everything around you tries to pull you off course. And it all begins with something very simple, yet extremely rare. You pause and you do not react. Law 2. No explanation. Liberation from the persona. And when you have learned not to react to external stimuli, a more subtle challenge begins to emerge. Can you stand firm without needing to explain yourself to anyone? Explanation is often disguised as clarity, but at a deeper level, it usually comes from a difficult-to-detect insecurity, the fear of being misunderstood, judged, or excluded. You do not just want others to hear you, you want them to agree with you. And in that very moment, you have given them the power to determine your value. Carl Jung called this psychological structure the persona, the social mask each person builds to exist in the eyes of others. But the paradox is that the more you try to protect the persona through explanation, the further you move away from your true self. There is a story in the Bible about Jesus standing trial before Pontius Pilate. Faced with accusations and the opportunity to defend himself, he remained almost silent. No lengthy explanations, no attempts to persuade, no resistance. By ordinary logic, it appears weak, as if surrendering the right to be understood. But at a deeper level, it is the expression of absolute inner strength. He did not need explanation to confirm who he was. When you truly know your essence, you no longer feel the need to prove it to the world. In modern life, we do the opposite almost every day. A message is not replied to, and you begin writing another one to clarify. A small misunderstanding occurs, and you feel the need to say a lot to fix your image. But the more you explain, the more you place yourself in a position that requires approval. And the paradox is this: those who do not want to understand you will not understand, no matter how much you say. Those who truly want to understand you do not need many words. Imagine you are standing in front of a distorted mirror. No matter how you adjust your expression, change your angle, or try to explain your image, that mirror will still reflect you in its distorted way. The problem is not you, but the nature of the mirror. And the world is the same. Not everyone has the capacity to reflect you accurately. When you try to explain to fix your image in their eyes, you are wasting energy on a system that cannot be changed. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When someone misunderstands you, it often triggers a part within you that seeks validation. But instead of chasing the correction of their perception, that moment becomes an opportunity to look inward. Why does their misunderstanding bother you so much? What are you trying to protect? And does that truly require external validation?" Not explaining is not rejecting communication. It is rejecting dependence on being accepted. It is an invisible boundary. You share when you want to, not when you feel forced to prove. You speak when it is meaningful, not when you fear being misunderstood. And in that selective silence, a form of power emerges. The power of someone who does not need validation to exist. In a world where everyone tries to be seen, understood, agreed with, not explaining becomes a rare act. It requires you to accept an uncomfortable truth. There will be people who never understand you, and that is completely okay. Because your value does not lie in how they see you, but in how firmly you stand without their gaze. And when you stop explaining, you do not just save energy, you begin to reclaim the power that has long been scattered. You no longer live to maintain an image in others' eyes, but begin to live from a deeper center, where you do not need to say too much to prove who you are. Because ultimately, power does not lie in how intensely you react, but in how firmly you can remain yourself when everything around you tries to pull you off your path. And it all begins with something very simple, yet incredibly rare.
If you've ever found yourself in a moment where the more you explained, the more you were misunderstood, the more you spoke, the more you lost control, share that story in the comments. Sometimes the experiences you've gone through are exactly what helps others realize they're not alone on this journey.
Law 3. Selective ignoring. Controlling psychological energy. But if you can stand firm without reacting or explaining, a deeper question begins to arise. Are you aware enough to recognize what deserves your attention and what does not? The truth that few people realize is this: attention is not just an action, it is your life energy. Every time you are pulled into a meaningless argument, a negative comment, or a small situation that occupies your mind for hours, you are not just thinking about it. You are transferring a part of your psychological energy into it. Carl Jung referred to this broadly as libido, the flow of psychic energy that operates your entire inner life. Where you place your attention becomes powerful. And if you do not choose, the world will choose for you. A viewer named Anna once shared that her day did not begin with work, but with checking messages, reading emails, and scrolling through comments about her in internal groups. Just one vague remark like, "doesn't seem good enough," was enough to occupy her thoughts all day. She began analyzing, imagining, sometimes even creating negative scenarios that had never actually happened. By the end of the day, she was exhausted not because of too much work, but because her mind had been pulled too far away from what truly mattered. One day, after burnout, she decided to try a small change. She did not read any comments that were not directly related to her work. No response, no rechecking, no analysis. At first, it made her uncomfortable, as if she was missing something important. But after just a few weeks, something began to change. She had more energy, more focus, and most importantly, she felt lighter. "I realized," she said, "I was not tired because of work. I was tired because I cared too much about things that did not deserve it." Modern neuroscience also demonstrates this clearly. Your brain has a system called the salience network, responsible for determining what is important and worth paying attention to. But this system is not entirely objective. It is shaped by habit. If you frequently pay attention to negative or meaningless stimuli, your brain will begin to treat them as important and continuously pull your focus toward them. Conversely, when you consciously ignore unnecessary signals, you are reprogramming this system, helping your brain focus on what truly has value. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." But what is less often mentioned is this: what you continuously pay attention to will also grow within you. If you keep returning to trivial things, they will become the center of your inner life. But if you learn to ignore, not through avoidance, but through conscious choice, you cut off the energy that feeds them. And without energy, they naturally fade away. Just ignore is therefore not a passive act, but a highly selective inner strategy. It is not that you do not see, it is that you see clearly, but are no longer compelled to react or interfere. You recognize, but you do not engage. You know, but you are not pulled in. And in that quiet choice, you preserve what is most valuable: focus, stability, and a form of power that does not need to be displayed, yet is unmistakably present.
Most people live as if they have no choice over what they pay attention to. They react to everything that appears before them, as if it were an obligation, as if silence meant weakness. But those who are truly strong enough, not everything deserves their presence, and not every stimulus requires a response. When you stop participating in what's unimportant, you lose nothing. On the contrary, if you begin to reclaim yourself piece by piece from the places where you have unconsciously scattered.
Remember, your life is not shaped by what happens around you, but by what you choose to keep within your mind. And when you are aware enough to ignore what is unworthy, you are not just protecting your energy, you are reshaping the entire direction of your life. Law 4. Not reacting to the shadow outside. If you have learned not to give your attention to what is unworthy, the next step goes even deeper. You begin to realize that not everything directed at you truly belongs to you. When someone attacks you, it is very rarely actually about you. They are reacting to a part within themselves, the part that Carl Jung called the shadow, and projecting it outward. It may be envy they do not acknowledge, insecurity they have not faced, or aspects they cannot accept within themselves. But instead of looking inward, they place it onto you, as if you are the cause. And the moment you react, you unconsciously take on that role, becoming the screen for what they have not resolved. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." But the opposite is also true. What others are triggered by in you often reflects something within them, not you. If you do not recognize this, you will live in conversations that do not truly belong to you, trying to fix things you never created. I once knew a man in a long-term romantic relationship. He was quiet, not expressive with words, but always consistent in his actions. His partner, on the other hand, frequently doubted that he cared enough, that he loved enough, simply because he did not speak as much as she expected. She constantly questioned, criticized, and sometimes accused him of being indifferent. At first he tried to explain, to prove through logic that his feelings were real. But the more he explained, the more tense everything became, as if each of his words opened a new loop of doubt. Until one moment, he realized that the problem was not in how he loved, but in her unresolved fear of abandonment. What she saw in him was not who he was, but her own inner insecurity looking for a form to attach to. From that point on, he stopped explaining. Not with coldness, but with inner clarity. He remained present, continued to act in the way he chose, but no longer tried to change her perception of him. And surprisingly, when he stopped reacting to those accusations, their intensity gradually decreased, not because she changed immediately, but because he was no longer the place for that insecurity to continue attaching itself. Imagine you are standing in front of someone holding paint and trying to throw it at you. If you move closer, react, or try to explain, you are placing yourself within their throwing range. But if you simply stand still, do not step forward, do not participate, most of what they throw will fall to the ground before it reaches you. Not because they stop immediately, but because you are no longer in the position to receive it. The shadow cannot exist without a screen to reflect on, and every time you react, you are unconsciously providing that surface. But when you choose not to react, not to explain, and simply to ignore, you interrupt that entire mechanism at its root. You do not resist, you do not avoid, you simply do not participate. And that very non-participation is the real power. This does not mean you deny all criticism. There are sincere feedbacks, and you can still listen to them with awareness. But the difference is this: you are no longer triggered. You no longer feel the need to defend or prove yourself against every word. You select what truly belongs to you to learn from, and let the rest pass without holding on to it, without carrying it, without allowing it to define you. Most people react not because of what is said, but because of how they interpret it, touching a sensitive point within. But when you understand projection, you begin to separate those two things more clearly. You no longer rush to take everything as a truth about yourself. You see, you notice, but you do not identify, do not react, do not need to explain, and do not need to hold on to it. And it is there that another kind of freedom begins to emerge. Freedom from having to become a mirror for other people's issues. Freedom from the need to respond to everything. And freedom from the pressure to explain yourself. If you have ever been in situations like this and recognize the value of not reacting, not explaining, and knowing how to ignore, press like on the video. A small action, but one that can help spread this message to more people, those who are also learning how to remain grounded amid what does not belong to them. Law 5. Silence as a form of invisible power. And when you no longer react to what does not belong to you, you begin to touch a more subtle layer of power, where silence is no longer emptiness, but becomes a deliberate choice. There are situations in life where the more you speak, the more you lose your position. Not because you are wrong, but because you are participating in a game whose rules do not favor truth, but favor whoever speaks more, whoever proves better. In those moments, trying to explain yourself does not make you clearer. It turns you into someone who needs to be judged. And once you step into that position, you have handed others the power to define you without realizing it. There is a very clear example in the life of Keanu Reeves. a famous figure in Hollywood, known not only for his iconic roles, but also for how he carries himself in the world. For many years, he has almost never spoken out about rumors, speculations, or distorted stories about his personal life. When journalists ask questions, he answers briefly, sometimes just smiles, sometimes remains silent. In a world where celebrities are expected to speak up, to clarify, to explain, his silence was once seen as cold, even evasive. But over time, it became a very unique kind of strength. No one can truly grasp or define him, because he has never given them that power. His silence is not a lack of confidence, but inner clarity. When you know who you are, you no longer feel the need to explain it to the world. And the less you explain, the more you preserve your wholeness. Because every explanation, if it comes from the need to be understood, carries with it a portion of energy given away. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Silence is not just the absence of speech, but a state where you are no longer compelled to prove. In that silence, you are not pulled into defending an image, not drawn into correcting others' perceptions. You stand still, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer need to say it. And it is here that the three core principles, never react, never explain, just ignore, begin to merge into a way of being. You do not react, so you are not pulled into others' emotions. You do not explain, so you do not give away the power to define yourself. And you know how to ignore, so you do not let trivial things consume your energy. These three seemingly simple things, when combined, create a rare kind of strength, a steady presence that requires no proof, no struggle, yet causes others to adjust themselves in front of you. Imagine a lake at dawn, completely still. When there are no ripples, the surface reflects the sky with perfect clarity. But with just a small movement, a stone falling in, everything is immediately disturbed. Your words are the same. Each time you rush to explain, you are throwing a stone into your own stillness. You think you are clarifying, but sometimes you are disturbing what was already clear. Most people fear silence, because in silence, they no longer control how others perceive them. And because of that, they keep talking, keep explaining, keep adjusting their image, and gradually lose themselves in the process. Those who are truly grounded are the opposite. They accept that there will be people who do not understand, that distorted perceptions will exist, and they do not need to intervene in all of it.
This does not mean you become distant or stop communicating. You can still speak, but you speak from choice, not from the pressure to prove. You share when you want to connect, not when you fear being misunderstood. And that small difference creates a vast shift in how you exist. When you do this, you do not let others decide who you are through your need to respond to them. You're not pulled into correcting stories that do not belong to you. You stand outside, not because you're detached, but because you no longer need to participate.
And within that silence, a form of invisible power emerges. Not loud, not showy, but steady enough that nothing can easily shake it. A power that does not come from how well you speak, but from knowing when you no longer need to speak. Law 6. Ignoring the inner world, not identifying with thoughts. When silence is no longer a reaction to the world, but becomes an inner state, you begin to realize the final place you need to master is your own mind. Just ignore, is not only about not reacting to others, but about the ability to not react to what is happening within you. A thought appears, "I'm not good enough. Everything will go wrong. They are judging me." And almost instantly, you are pulled into it. You do not notice that moment of transition where you move from being the observer to becoming the content of the thought itself. And right there, you lose your power without even realizing it. But when you begin to observe more deeply, a truth gradually reveals itself. Thoughts are not you. Emotions are not you. They are simply phenomena that arise and pass. But if you react to them, you are carried away. If you explain them, you reinforce them. And if you believe them, you hand over control to them. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When you do not recognize what is operating within, you think that is who you are. But in reality, those are just old patterns repeating. And each time you react, each time you try to rationalize why you feel that way, you are continuing to feed that very loop. I once heard a story in a therapy session about a woman who was constantly trapped in recurring thoughts that she was not good enough. Every time she made a small mistake, she would immediately fall into a chain of negative thinking, then begin analyzing, explaining, trying to find reasons why she was like that. But the more she tried to understand, the deeper she sank into that feeling, as if she was constructing a narrative to prove that it was real. Until one day in a session, she was guided to try something different, not reacting, not explaining, just observing. When a thought appeared, she saw it like text passing across her mind. No need to fix it. No need to believe it. No need to resist it. And gradually, the thoughts that once carried weight began to feel lighter. Not because they disappeared immediately, but because she was no longer participating in them. Modern neuroscience shows this very clearly. Your brain constantly generates thoughts as a predictive mechanism. Regions like the default mode network activate when you think about yourself, the past, and the future, creating internal stories. But these stories are not always accurate. They are simply products of habit and memory. When you react, you activate old emotional circuits. When you explain, you reinforce that structure. But when you simply observe, the prefrontal cortex regulates, creating distance between you and the content of your mind. And that distance is freedom. At the deepest level, the three core principles appear once again, this time turned inward. You do not react to thoughts, so they do not lead you. You do not explain emotions, so they do not become stories. And you ignore what is unnecessary, so it no longer has energy to exist. Never react, never explain, just ignore. Not only how you face the world, but how you free yourself from your own mind. Imagine your mind as the sky, and thoughts and emotions as clouds. If you identify with them, every dark cloud becomes your entire sky. But if you step back, you will see that clouds only pass. The sky remains vast and untouched. You do not need to chase them away. You only need to not become them. Most people spend their lives trying to fix their thoughts, think more positively, feel better, control more. But the more they try to control, the more trapped they become. Because they are still reacting, still explaining, still participating. Freedom does not come from controlling the content of the mind, but from no longer identifying with it. And it is there that the deepest form of power appears. Not power over others, but power over yourself. You still have thoughts, still have emotions, but they no longer define you. You are no longer pulled by every passing thought, no longer carried by every wave of feeling. You are there, observing, aware, but not controlled.
If you ever experienced a moment where you realized you were no longer being carried away by the thoughts in your mind, if only for a few brief seconds, leave a word in the comments, awake, as a marker for yourself, that you've begun to see the distance between you and your mind, and you no longer completely be driven by what arises within you.
Law 7. Unmanipulable. Freedom from all triggers. And after everything you have practiced, not reacting, not explaining, and knowing how to ignore, gradually converges into a unified way of living, you enter the final stage, a state where nothing can easily influence you, from both outside and within. The seventh law is not a technique, but the natural result of everything you have gone through. When you do not react to stimuli, do not explain to be accepted, and do not give attention to what is unworthy, you gradually become someone who cannot be manipulated. Not because the world changes, but because you no longer operate through mechanisms that the world can act upon. If someone tries to provoke you with words, they find no anchor. If someone tries to misunderstand you, you no longer feel the need to correct them. If a small situation arises, it no longer has the force to pull you out of your state. You do not resist these things, but you also do not participate. And that very non-participation makes you invisible to all attempts at manipulation. Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." When you still react, you are living as a consequence of circumstances. When you still explain, you are living as an image in others' eyes. When you are still drawn into trivial things, you are living according to what appears in front of you. But when you pause, you begin to choose. And that capacity to choose is the core of inner sovereignty. I once heard a story within a group of close friends. One man often became the center of jokes whenever the group gathered. At first, the teasing was light, but over time, it became sharper, sometimes touching sensitive points about his appearance and personal life. Previously, every time this happened, he reacted. Sometimes he forced a laugh. Sometimes he responded with other jokes. Sometimes he explained that he was not as they said. But the more he reacted, the more the jokes repeated, as if he had unconsciously confirmed the role they assigned to him. One evening, the situation happened again. A friend made a familiar, teasing remark, and the group began to laugh. But this time, he did not react as before. He did not laugh along, did not argue, did not explain. He simply remained silent, looked directly, then shifted the topic to something else he cared about. He no longer participated in that script. At first, the atmosphere became slightly awkward, as if the group did not know how to continue. But after a few times like that, the teasing gradually disappeared. Not because people changed, but because they no longer received the response needed to maintain that role. And from then on, the way they treated him also changed, not because he demanded it, but because he was no longer someone who could be pulled into the old pattern. This is the state of being unmanipulable. It does not mean you become cold or detached, but that you become free. You can still connect, but without dependence. You can still listen, but without being pulled along. You can still act, but without being driven by unconscious reactions. And at the deepest level, the familiar three principles appear once again, but this time, no longer as rules you must remember, but as a natural part of how you exist. You do not react because you are no longer triggered. You do not explain because you no longer need validation. And you ignore because you clearly know what deserves your energy. Never react, never explain. Just ignore, no longer something you try to do, but the state you live from. And when you live from this state, you do not need to prove that you are strong. You do not need to display control. Your presence itself is clear enough, not loud, not imposing, but steady enough that nothing can easily pull you off course. You no longer seek certainty from the outside, because you have become your own stable center from within. That is not separation from the world. That is freedom within this very world, a freedom that requires no conditions, no perfect circumstances, only that you no longer give your power to what does not belong to you.
A person who lives by these 7 laws is not someone trying to become invincible, but someone who no longer needs to fight. They don't waste energy reacting to everything that touches them, don't spend time explaining themselves, and do not allow trivial things to shape their inner state. They live as a steady center, not because the world has become lighter, but because they no longer are carried by it. What truly makes someone unmanipulable does not lie in controlling others, but in no longer being controlled by unconscious reactions. From the pause before a reaction, from silence that needs no explanation, to the ability to ignore what is unworthy, all of it gradually merges into a rare form of strength, inner freedom.
If this video makes you reflect on how you react, explain, and allocate your attention, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss upcoming content. And if you find value in this journey, share this video with those who are also seeking stability from